Uh,
Yeah.
okay, so I hope you're seeing a slide.
Want any picture of the little creepy?
Yeah, blank. It says
You
submitted
don't have to be
graphics.
rushed.
Okay, so submitted graphics. Okay, here off we go. So Ed Loosely, who was in Kenya, he was actually the one that sent this graph all the way from Kenya. So I don't think we gave him credit for that. So uh, Ed, when you watch this, thank you. Um, and he had another comment. He says he smiles every time we talk about how great Japan is. And he suspects Aiko has her thumb on the scales. Uh-huh. Anyway, talking about the longevity of the Japanese and that sort of thing. And then I don't know if I showed this before. I think I mentioned that the a new woman prime minister was in a metal band when she was young, which is interesting because she's very conservative, but not so conservative that she couldn't be in a metal band. And they did K-pop at a summit with the North Korean leader or South. So yeah, like that, South Korean. Um, and then just an update on her. She's rolling the dice big time. She's kind of popular, but uh, uh, she decided that she would call a snap election and see if she could get an even bigger majority in parliament. And she's done that, but now that act is not popular in itself, and her popularity is dropping. So her audacity may be backfiring on her. We'll see. And then the other sad thing is there's no more pandas in Japan. China is playing hardball for Sanai's comment that if
No.
Taiwan were invaded, Japan might have to come to the rescue.
Oh,
So
thank
Japan's so mad they took back their pandas. Um, okay, Minnesota in the news. Before we get, I want to do a brief history, but before we do that, I want to just give an example of their strong tradition of civil society. Uh, so the civic culture, this was in the East Bay Times, and I thought it was a fascinating essay. Um, but what is that? Um, and Minneapolis is doing something that ICE has not encountered anywhere else. A united citizenry cooperating with each other, um, uh, blowing whistles, keeping up a network on social media so everybody's informed where ICE is moving. There's been some of that in Los Angeles, but not as well coordinated. And this is maybe getting contagious. In Boston, they were chanting solidarity uh, with Minneapolis. Uh, so there's in Boston, they're saying, we're not cold, we're not afraid. Many taught us to be brave. So, and Bruce Springsteen has come out with a song in keeping. And so ICE is rationale for coming in was ostensibly to as payback for the welfare fraud that had been centered in the Somali refugee community. And of course, Tim Walz was Kamala Harris's running mate for vice president. So Trump doesn't like him for that reason. But it's kind of sad that this culture of generosity that they have in Minnesota, and we'll talk about their Scandinavian roots when I get to the history. It's a shame that that was taken advantage of. Of course, the short history involves George Floyd. It was in Minneapolis where he was murdered, and there was a lot of violence back in 2020, and there were no-go areas or police-free zones, but only a few blocks around one intersection. But our journalist son, who I think has joined us, has been to Minneapolis in the last week, and he points out that crime in Minneapolis is still 2 to 3 times above the national average. But before we move on to see what he has to say, I'll just quote the former mayor. He says that Minnesotans vote and volunteer more. He points out that there's a robust local media, and he says it's the most powerful collective experience I've been a part of. That's the former mayor. Yes, Homer.
Sorry, I was muted. The 2 to 3 times national average. What does that mean, national average? Is that across the nation or cities of comparable size? What is the 2 to 3 times the average of? Crime in where?
Good question. I double checked Jeremy's impression with Chat GPT, and I'd have to go back and see how they defined it. I didn't put it on the slide.
Yeah, and what kind of crime? Violent crime, all crime, theft?
So what my understanding, and I didn't know you were going to bring this up, Dad, but what's interesting is that Portland and not so much Los Angeles, but Portland and Minneapolis, their crime statistics have not returned to pre-pandemic levels in regards to violent crime. And in those years following the riots of 2020, as politicians were pressured more and more, there were, they got rid of cash bail. They made all of these progressive reforms, similar to what we saw under Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, Gascon in Los Angeles. And certain crimes weren't prosecuted anymore. And all of that, I think, cumulatively put crime statistics higher than, even today, than they were before the pandemic in regards to violent crime.
Did Minneapolis have a low rate before the pandemic?
Lower. I'd have to look at it specifically.
I'd just like to know how Minneapolis compares now to, I don't know, Cincinnati or Houston, or that's too big a city, or Charlottesville.
Yeah, I'm not sure in terms of their population as far as a crime rate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll just Jeremy, I'll turn it over to you to freelance. Why don't you just go ahead and do that now?
Oh, yeah. So I just got back from Minneapolis last week. I made two visits recently. And what's significant about the organizing is that it is pretty radical and pretty uniform. In other words, Minneapolis, I think, only had 10% that supported the Republican Trump, and it's pretty it's a monoculture, and politically, and with that brings a kind of interesting uh, I guess radical action. So when you describe George Floyd Square when they took over for months on end, all the way up to the end of 2020, they took over that area as an autonomous zone. We're seeing even on the streets of Minneapolis today, they're instigating checkpoints and trying to do this kind of uh, community policing, because the ethos at the bottom of all of this activism is not just defund the police, which was the rallying cry of 2020 out of Minneapolis in a mainstream sense, but it's actually abolish the police. And there's a lot of anarchists and socialist groups that are now their messaging of abolish ICE is being a little is welcomed more than abolish the police was in 2020, which to most of us probably seemed fantastical and impractical. But abolish ICE is actually getting some traction, and with that, the social justice movement in Minneapolis is very active. Now, I drove around trying to find one of these scenes to document them. The people who are getting video at these ICE confrontations are the activists themselves, and they're networked. They're in encrypted signal chats with each other. So they're telling each other when they suspect an ICE action is going to happen. They have people tailing the ICE convoy, and they're extremely well organized to the point I went to the household of the Hamon father who was expelled. You know, they broke in and they took him out. It was reported while he was singing karaoke with his family, he was out in a robe and his boxers, and I really wanted to interview him and talk to him. And as I approached the house, people essentially stopped me, community members. They wanted to know who I was. They wanted to know what my social media handles were. So you get this very this social activism, and they all have these orange beanies. Sometimes I don't know if you've seen them, or orange whistles. And the refuse fascism is a more palatable I guess, national movement that started, I think, pre-2020. But Refuse Fascism, they showed up at Josh Hawley's house in Virginia, I think in 2021, just days before the Capitol riot. And what's interesting is you see these orange whistles, which is kind of their imprint, and that's the whistles that they're blowing. And a lot of normie progressives are in on this, but then there's also more radical anarchists, and in this case, it's the Revolutionary Communist Party, that Revcom out of Chicago, which actually a couple of their members are behind the Refuse Fascism push. So if you ever go to a protest and you see black and orange Refuse Fascism, Trump and Pence out now, that was what those mass distributed protest signs looked like way back in 2017. And so Refuse Fascism is very much involved in the current organizing in Minneapolis as well.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, Bob.
Um, Jeremy, this is terrific to have you as a first-hand witness on our uh, meeting today. Thank you. I've got a question. you called the organization, or they call themselves, I think you said refuse fascism. Would you say that when people argue there's no such organization as Antifa, that perhaps there are other organizations who have avoided the title Antifa, which has become rather plagiarized by the right?
Yeah, yeah,
It seems to
you
me
know,
like there is an anti-fascist, pretty well organized organization.
well, Antifa or anti-fascism or Antifa is a movement. So you would have uh, supporting organizations that are loosely linked to one another, but there is no umbrella. It's decentralized as a movement. So there's no head of Antifa and activists and militants alike. It's an inside joke, and they're very amused to no end that nobody can quite define what it is because it's an ideology or a movement, and certain local affinity groups can name themselves Antifa. For example, a official group called Berkeley Antifa was very involved in 2017 at UC Berkeley. And there's still a group that calls itself Antifa Sacramento that is active. We had SoCal Antifa that for some reason in the summer of 2021 came out and just started brawling and showing up at right-wing protests to pick fights. So these groups it's a kind of pop-up militancy where they just kind of can come up at any time, any place and declare themselves on Twitter or now Blue Sky, which is the social media site that has a more leftist bent. And they can pop up and then slowly disappear. But then there's nonprofits that might be a little more radical, or groups like I went to a Portland protest just this weekend, and that was organized by the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And they started at City Hall and were talking about the virtues of militant protest. In other words, that it's not a time to just sit there in animal costumes with friendly signs. And so sure enough, they rushed the loading dock of the ICE facility in Portland. Within an hour, huge tear gas plume, deployed by Homeland Security, and this kind of militant protest is very active right now in specifically in Los Angeles, Portland, and Minneapolis. Those three, and those groups, very few call themselves Antifa, if any, right now. It's all autonomous militancy in the name of anti-fascism.
Thank you.
David,
Yeah. Hey, Jeremy, nice to see you. Total numbers. I've heard that ICE in Minneapolis is 3,000 people and that their police force is something like 500. So, that's large numbers of a militant force, which is going to cause, a reaction. I'm just wondering about if you know the numbers, total. I know that the ICE has got like a $28 billion budget. It's larger than most militaries around the world. This is not a small thing that's happening, and I'm curious what you think, or if you know those numbers.
Well, I was just studying the budgetary numbers too, and what would be interesting to also contrast is what ICE was funded at under Joe Biden in the final year, because I was seeing figures in the billions as well. As far as Minneapolis specifically, I've said time and time again, there's a reason that Trump, and I think he's stayed out of Portland. Well, yeah, he lost the court battle to send federal troops into Portland. My understanding is that there's only like a half a dozen people at the ICE building who are with Federal Protective Services and right now in Portland. And yet we get these big spectacles, just like in Minneapolis, all these ICE agents being sent in. They were working under El Centro's commander at large. His name was Greg Bovino.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of showmanship there was one particular clash where the ICE agents were being tailed around by an activist convoy for the better part of an hour. Then they stopped at a gas station and went to, fuel up. And whenever they stop, then all the activists surround them and they're blowing whistles and they're throwing things at the ICE agents. And then, sure enough, one of the last, I think it was the Wednesday before Alex Preddy was shot, there was a big clash in which Bovino isn't even wearing a gas mask and he throws out a smoke bomb. So you see this green smoke and you see this chaos, but they didn't arrest a single person that day in that confrontation. They weren't even putting on their gas masks. It wasn't actual CS gas like I saw in Portland this weekend. The whole thing was kind of this show where that unfortunately, when you have this kind of constant escalation where you see these things on social media and you see the swagger of Bovino, and then the New York Post and the New York Times were writing articles about his coat being World War II era and this and that and Nazi like. And soon enough, all of this cosplay kind of escalated to where Alex Preddy is shot and killed. And in both these cases, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, these are people who have inserted themselves into the protest scene with these officers who are, carrying live rounds, but at times behaving as if the whole thing is a kind of they call it a LARP, live action role play. And a lot of this protest militancy has that feel to it, that it's all performative until something goes wrong, and then it's not anymore.
Any other? Yeah, Michael.
Well, I would still say that I think the ICE people that are being hired are some of the probably worst of the worst, regardless of what you may say. But I think they're trigger happy, they're untrained, there are two American citizens dead. I mean, there may be performative active actions on the part of the demonstrators, but a lot of people have said it's common sense police action. If somebody's got a car and they're starting to back up and then pull away, you don't stand in front of it, and certainly don't start shooting. I mean, I will bet anything it's going to come out that a lot of these ICE people are poorly trained, as I say, and they're just looking for a fight. They want nothing more than to be shooting their tear gas and pepper spraying people in the face. They should be disciplined, and they're not military. And I just feel that these are people who are the worst of the worst, but they are getting a $50,000 bonus.
Yeah, I mean that's we don't know who the heck they are in some ways, and how this is all it's completely it's chaotic, and it's chaotic with the protesters, and it's chaotic within those operations, which seem, again, to be, from what I witnessed, they were very hard to find. This was the part that was frustrating for me, was that all the activists are networked with each other, and I'm not in that network. And then all there are conservative influencers who are down there getting video, and they're connected with ICE. So if you try to be an unbiased journalist in the middle, you're not connected with either side, because the minute that you start to connect with one side, you're expected to play favor to that side. So it's really hard to catch these conflicts when they happen unless you go to the federal building where a protest is happening and something is escalating. But these roving patrols, it's very much the activists are connected, they're monitoring, and they're stopping anyone that they suspect is ICE. And then you have as you, I think, accurately portrayed, questionably trained ICE agents who are who knows what their protocol is. According to, what was his name, Stephen Miller, he came out and told them they all have immunity.
Yeah. Bob.
Um, I'm interested to follow up on a New York The Daily episode. I think it was from yesterday, in which it was pointed out that a key figure in Minneapolis to negotiate with Tom Homan is the elected sheriff of Hennepin County, and that really it's her developing relationship, if there is one, with ICE through Tom Homan, which is likely to be a key point of de-escalation in Minneapolis, in that it was the Hennepin County Jail, which until recently had an ICE office within it to do the handover of undocumented immigrants who had completed their sentences for various types of crime. Have you heard anything more about that, Jeremy?
Well, what's interesting, I've been looking at these immigration numbers, and a big part of why Obama's deportation numbers were so high was because there was cooperation between big cities and the federal government, but through a program that was called Secure Communities. Secure Communities was a federal program that was launched in the last year of George W. Bush. And what it did was it networked big cities so that ICE could quickly file detainers. So if a big city was going to arrest somebody for a crime, and that person was undocumented, ICE could then file a detainer and take over at that point. And between the years of the last year, I guess it was 2008, the last year of Bush, when it is conceived or implemented, to 2013, and it still exists. But in those first 5 years, which are the first 5 years of the Obama presidency, that program, Secure Communities, is realized at its full potential. Now, at the end of those 5 years, activists start pushing on Obama because he's coming up on 2 million deportations. So you have Keith Ellison, John Lewis, Charles Rangel. As part of this 2013 protest in DC, they all get arrested. There's a hunger strike. And then the head of La Raza and the ACLU all call Obama the deporter in chief publicly by 2014. And Obama's numbers just start dropping in the last 3 years of his presidency. His deportation, including the deportation of criminals, which those with a criminal record were averaging, close to, 150,000 to 200,000. And then they start dropping. By the time of Biden, they start going below 100,000 regularly as far as deporting those with criminal records. Activists argue, well, most of these people are being picked up on drunk driving or motor vehicles violations. That's true. The violent crime index of that is roughly 10 to 15%. But this is sort of what gives Trump his entry in 2015, and then more so in 2024. All of these cities have shored up their sanctuary city policies even more. So by the time 2025 comes around and Trump is back, there is zero willingness to cooperate with Trump to achieve even Obama era level numbers of deportation, where you have the total number of deportations maybe 400,000 in 2012, for example. Half of those, 200,000, have a criminal record, and then 20,000, those 10% to 15%, 20 to 20, or I want to say, yeah, I want to say 20%, like 20,000 or less are violent crime. So when those numbers start dropping due to activist pressure, because this is the important thing. Billie Eilish got in front of the Grammys and said these words. She said, "No one is illegal on stolen land." That has been repeated in activist circles over and over. No, it made it onto a lot of lawn signs in during Trump one, right? No human is illegal, 2017. But that idea is that it comes from radical politics, revolutionary politics. Anarchists, communists, and socialists all believe that there should be no such thing as a border. And that's where I think things get a little murky because the messaging on the street is a very extreme position.
Yes, it's probably not a winning Democrat Party message to say there's no such thing as borders.
Right. And then that's, everybody in the press, okay, when Trump won, it was like, okay, we're not ready for a woman. We're not ready for, but really, I mean, just as much as her deplorable comment, it was the leak of Hillary Clinton's comment to Brazilian bankers that she envisioned a society with no borders. That was her comment that was WikiLeaks got a hold of and released that she had given these, speeches for hundreds of thousands of dollars and dabbled in that ideological space of I'm envisioning open borders.
Tell them what James Carville said.
Yeah, so I'm writing this book and I'm at the sort of end of it, but James Carville, I think, was quoted as saying that the three dumbest words in the English language were defund the police. And I argue that Carville's wrong. The three dumbest words in the English language are abolish the police. And that's the actual rallying cry that is on a street level, which is now translating to abolish ICE and is actually getting a lot of traction amongst celebrities and whatnot.
Jim,
I'm interested in your perspective on the arrests of Don Lemon and Georgia Font, whatever her name is.
Yeah, Georgia Fort.
Yes.
So I kind of tongue in cheek, but very seriously said the great thing about the Constitution is it really does protect you to be as partisan a journalist as Don Lemon is. And you can so I came out very much in favor of Don Lemon's right to be there in that church and be documenting and not be linked in with the protesters, even if he was allied with them. His action was to document. Now, he should have, if he wanted to be more fair, he would have turned the microphone on them and asked them hard questions, but he didn't do that. And there's nothing in the law that obligates him to be a good journalist. He can be as terrible as he is, and that's his right under the First Amendment, in my opinion. Otherwise, those who were covering January 6th also should be taken in as well, if they were not, if they were covering the event. So I was trying to be consistent with this, and I got on X, I got what you call ratioed, where this is this ultimate humiliation in today's social media age, where the number of people who like your post are significantly less than those that are commenting. So getting ratioed is this cultural phenomenon, and I'd never had it happen to me as much as I did when I came out on X, which is mostly now a right-wing platform of users. Since Elon Musk bought it, everybody else left, from celebrities to activists. And so I wrote, free speech does not solely protect the unbiased journalist. Don Lemon has a constitutional right to disseminate lazy partisan coverage of any newsworthy event. So
Just
not
like
exactly a
Steve
shining endorsement of Lemon,
Yeah.
but
Just like
this
Steve
post,
Bannon.
Calling it lazy journalism.
yeah,
Like
there's,
Steve Bannon, right?
what's that?
It's like Steve Bannon. There are a lot of biased journalists out there.
Yeah, there's people who are, I would argue that he's protected to be there. I think he's been overcharged. Even if you ask X's AI if he violated this FACE Act, it says no, he didn't, because that would require some kind of physical obstruction. Don Lemon was clearly there documenting the event. So to me, it but the users of X did not see it this way, and they commented the post was has a mark of 600,000 views with 300 comments, and it had only 9 people liking it, but now that's up to 17. So
So Blue Sky didn't have that finding.
Blue Sky. Well, my problem on Blue Sky is that nobody follows me there because they're all I only have 100 people who look at my profile because I'm considered pretty heretical on Blue Sky.
We need to all sign up.
Yeah, yeah. Follow
Well,
me on Blue
why
Sky.
why are you considered heretical?
Well, because I'm critical of the utility of violence as a method of protest. I argued back in 2020 that the violent protesting uh, would do one of two things, and I think it did both. I said it'll get Trump elected eventually again if nobody comes out strong enough against violence and militancy in the protest scene. Um, and and I thought, and there's just no off button to it. Um, Militancy and the protesting. I mean, it's rhetorically very um, angry and aggressive, and only angry and aggressive. It's not working towards any practical solutions. The protest scene on the left is speaking in absolute terms of abolish the police, abolish ICE, um, you know, no borders, no one is illegal. So I had maintained back in 2020 that I thought that this would have helped Trump more than anything.
Yeah, we really needed a sister soldier moment from the Democrats, and it didn't happen. Tom,
We still might.
I got two questions for you, Jeremy. Thanks a lot for this presentation. Number one question, this 2-week ICE bill that's before the House and the Senate, I know you don't know how it's going to turn out. How do you think it's going to turn out? And then my second question is this. You brought up this interesting point about violent protest. So it seems to me that people fall into Donald Trump's trap by having violent protests. So why do these organizers and these protesters have violent protests? So if you can, please answer those two questions, please.
Yeah, there's an interesting conversation between Charlie Kirk and Gavin Newsom at the beginning of last year. Gavin Newsom was launching this podcast, and he was talking to Charlie Kirk, and he doesn't really challenge Charlie Kirk on where he's wrong. For example, not supporting marriage equality or having bused people to January 6th. But he does listen to Charlie Kirk's advice as to where the left is wrong. And Charlie Kirk argued that there's no dissent in culturally on the left, and that the Republican Party has very public disagreements with each other all the time, but the left is pretty much everybody agreeing with each other. And I thought that was interesting that he said that to Newsom. And the one thing he didn't tell Newsom, he said he wasn't going to give away his advice, was he didn't tell Newsom the last time he was at UC Davis, people dressed in black bashed out the arena windows and threw rocks at conservative. This is in 2023. So why do these violent protests happen, and why do they evade mainstream media scrutiny? That's been my question, and it does. My answer has always been it absolutely plays into Trump's hands, because Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA, when he was at UC Davis, I was there filming, and I'm looking around, and I ended up meeting two young women who were part of Turning Point USA that were dressed in black, and I clocked them as infiltrators. They basically infiltrated in, and they were getting all the best footage for Turning Point USA of their event being attacked. So it was playing right into the hands of conservatives being able to turn around and say, well, this is what the left thinks of us. They won't even let us talk. And obviously, with Charlie Kirk's death, that was proven even further. And and the idea I guess, is that anybody to the right, this is why I'm considered heretical. I mean, anybody who's to the right of the of democratic socialist platform, or the people who are of the activists, is considered is tarred and feathered as being right wing. And it all that culture, I think, is a constant losing phenomenon for the left right now.
There's a movie, Brazil. I don't know if you've seen it, 1984, but I just resaw it. And if those of you who haven't seen it, it's a Terry Gilliam, but in it, the terrorists are doing bombings, but you never see a terrorist. And the implication is, in fact, that the armed forces are both the terrorists and responding to terrorists. They're creating their own violence, which they then point out. And I just wonder, there was some allegations about that around the George Floyd. I thought there was some white nationalist who was like covered his mask. And I wonder what if you think that's a real force, and if so, how potent.
Yeah, so there were a lot of in 2020, I was of the opinion that the violence must be coming from the right. So I set off, and I write about this in my book, to find white supremacist violence, which I thought was out there um, during 2020. Now, there are a couple outliers. There was a man named Stephen Carrillo, who was an Air Force sergeant who drove down from the Novato Air Force Base and joined in the chaos and killed two federal agents, officer, or no, one federal officer, and then he killed a sheriff on during his arrest, a deputy sheriff down near Santa Cruz. Um, and what my determination was, that as much as I wanted that, it was an outlier case. And a lot of these times with these ideas of right-wing extremism um, being the actual force behind it, I didn't find that to be true. Even when militia were showing up at protests, the militia were not kind of murderous revolutionaries. They were constitutionalists. When I first went to Tulsa in 2020, Trump was giving his first speech out of the pandemic. And I talked the first Boogaloo guy. This was this militia meme from the internet. And the first guy I met, they'd all wear Hawaiian shirts. The first guy I met was black. And it threw me because I didn't expect that. I thought I was going to be expecting some kind of white supremacist militia movement. But that wasn't the case. And the more I talked to her, I realized that militia people, when they come out to these protests, as far back as Charlottesville, 2017, they're showing up in Berkeley too, even though they were unarmed at that point. They were showing up to protect free speech because the police were essentially being expelled from the protest space. Police could not show up, or else they would be attacked by the masses on the left who were decidedly anti-police. So I understand it was kind of, for me, it was a kind of, I called it a comfort narrative, where I wanted to believe that the catalyzing force was coming from the right and not the left in the protest scene. But I found that it was the opposite of that. And this conflict actually goes back to the punk scene in Minneapolis, of all places. In Minneapolis, and I'll just wrap up really quick. In the late 80s, a gang formed called the Baldies, and they were anti-racist skinheads, and they would go up against the neo-Nazi skinheads. That organization, the Baldies, started a network called Anti-Racist Action. It was going to be called Anti-Fascist Action, which their European counterpart was, but they said, you know what? People don't really know what fascism is here in the late 80s. I mean, we could throw it around, but let's call ourselves the Anti-Racist Action Network. And that's the beginning of a formalized Antifa network. Once it dissolved in the 90s, it kind of ate itself. There were accusations of sexual misconduct by some of the men, and it being too patriarchal and this and that, and it kind of tore itself down. It then resurrected as a network called Torch Antifa, which still exists today. You can Google Torch Antifa and you'll get to their website. And they're basically a consortium of 12 Antifa groups But all of this started in Minneapolis, all of the modern anti-fascist movement.
So
And
my first question about what do you think the Democrats are going to gain when they have this 2 week ICE bill or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, I haven't really parsed that, so I don't want to speak out of turn in the sense that that's not. I I I will say this on a more local level, because Walz isn't running again, maybe he can do something. But the mayor of Minneapolis is in this situation, and the same situation he was in 2020. The activists already want him out. You can never be radical enough for this group. When you reach a certain critical mass of radicalism, then they go after the moderate with pretty successfully. So there's already signs in some businesses in Minneapolis that say Jacob Frey out now, and they're already against him. So there's nothing he can do to placate that movement. What I think the Trump administration has used and I think they've used Minneapolis and Portland and LA to some extent, all in the publicity of is they want these cities to be working with the federal government in the same way they worked with Obama when Tom Homan was the chief of ICE. So there's a reference point that Tom Homan would want to get back to, and that's 2015 when President Obama was draping a medal around his neck. Uh, you know, Years before, Trump comes in, they do child separation, and then he retires after that debacle. Even child separation happens months after Schumer kills the DACA deal, which would have given Trump 25 billion for a wall um, in 2018, and in exchange for the Dreamers, and that the Democrats, 2020 foolishly walked away from that. But the pressure that I think Democratic politicians feel is from their loudest voices, not from the moderates or the liberals, because there's a distinct difference between the people on the street who have this leftist militancy and then everyday working liberals. And I think that the because the activist left is so loud and so successful at labeling people fascist who are even on their own side, that there's this unwillingness to compromise on immigration. So I haven't studied what's in the current compromise. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But all I can say is that as long as this story has been going under Trump, Democratic politicians have been held to a very they've been nervous about compromising with a fascist or doing anything that could be labeled as that, even if it just means returning to the kind of deportation numbers that Barack Obama had with Tom Homan. Because you should know 2021 is key through all this because the numbers just collapse under Biden. For whatever reason, and it might be more activists were had influence in the Biden administration that he was, whereas Barack Obama was always to maintain centrism. Biden might have wanted to court the progressives and not be seen as out of touch. The immigration numbers do explode in 2021, not just in border encounters, but as far as the number of deportations of those with criminal records just is down 80% compared to Biden compared to Obama 2012. Biden 2020 in 2022 especially are very low. So we've gone if you look at those kind of numbers, we're very far away from what deportation looked like when Obama was working with Homan. So it'll be interesting to see if any Democrats are willing to restore those benchmarks or that way of doing things. But right now, the cities are under pressure, just like Jacob Fry. All these cities, Karen Bass is under a tremendous amount of pressure, and it's the loudest voices that are always putting her in check and saying that she's, too far to the right.
Yeah, Bob, you had a flurry of thumbs up there. What was that in response to?
Ooh, Jeremy's presentation and discussion and Q&A and comments, really informative. I'm not sure whether I want to join in ratioing him or not.
Michael.
Well, one thing I'd like Jeremy to comment on is there have been two of these No Kings marches. First, I think they estimated 5 million. The next one, 7 million. And there's another one coming up at the end of March. And the view I had of those people, I participated in both, where they were absolutely nonviolent. There was no violence out of all these millions of peoples. If there were provocateurs or people on the left or the right trying to stir up trouble, as far as I know, in both of those. So the image I get, at least from those two marches, was there was an absence of violence. People weren't rioting, breaking windows, burning cars. And I'd like you to comment on that.
Yeah, well, there was a death, and it's an unfortunate one that happened in Utah. It was a Polynesian father. And what happened was the Utah protest allowed armed peacekeepers to be there that were part of the No Kings protest. And that goes back to 2020. In 2020 in Utah, you had both sides. You'd had Black Lives Matter marches where people were armed, and then you had counter militias showing up that were armed. So it was a very in Utah of all places in 2020. Nobody hears about this, but it had gotten very, very intense. What happened was a leftist showed up with a gun, open carrying, and one of the peacekeepers fired at him, thinking he was a right winger, and then killed this father. So that was an unfortunate thing that happened at the first No Kings in Utah. Now, No Kings was a very mainstream peaceful protest. So for something like that to happen, it was not representative of the rest of the country. But our main Antifa group, which in LA raised $2.5 million for violent protest in 2020. 2.5 million. They're the ones that were responsible for police cars going up in flames in front of the CBS studios on May 30th of 2020. And the guy, Richie Surjanko, is the head of that, just tweeted a No Kings poster. And it says, March 28th, no thrones, no crowns, no kings. And it's save the date, the next No Kings is set. Um, and then he wrote, just in time to kill the rising insurgency, exclamation point. And so the attitude from these militants is that they're against peaceful protest, that No Kings is not something that they would go do, that it's considered to them to be that liberals who are calling for peace and compromise are essentially, let's see, what did you say? A counterinsurgency that peaceful protest only strives to quash a uprising, and that's how radical those folks are. But that's very different than No Kings, yes. And I think most people can see that, except for the one example in Utah where you had a very unfortunate tragedy.
Well, of course, that's where Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Was
Yeah.
that assassination in continuity with this violence in Utah?
Well, it is strange that Utah has become this point. And the reason I don't get into this yet, but the reason is you actually have a lot of leftist nonprofits that sprung up in Utah because the Church of Latter-day Saints was the force that was against marriage equality back, what would have been like 8 years ago. And since then, the Church of Latter-day Saints totally flipped. They don't recognize they don't give full rights, I don't think, to homosexual couples, but they have not they have had the revelation to not oppose same-sex unions and not oppose it um, either politically or within congregates. So the Church of Latter-day Saints completely reversed, but there was a battle that was fought where the Church of Latter-day Saints was against marriage equality and all these and Salt Lake City became ground zero. So you had all these nonprofits and that sprung up. And then once the battle was over, well, what next? And that's what a lot of the marriage equality infrastructure, once you win, all of the activists pull up their tents and just go home? No, they moved on to the next thing, which is protect trans kids, which is a whole new kind of can of worms that I think also took most Democratic leaders by surprise of where am I supposed to be on this issue? I kind of came out of nowhere as far as transitioning minors. And so that's why Charlie Kirk was shot and killed because Charlie Kirk came out and was at odds with trans activists who said that he called for the lynching of trans people. That was a lie that was spread in 2023 at UC Davis, repeated by the chancellor of UC Davis even, but it wasn't true. Charlie Kirk is not for gender transition. He's strongly against gender transition of children. And he talks about that to Gavin Newsom in that conversation. But that's what put a target on his back. And that's why Utah has been kind of this ground zero for cultural conflict because of its religious majority and the marriage equality fight. And now trans activism sort of taking the place after marriage equality was won.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
And so the person who assassinated him had a trans lover and made a decision that Charlie Kirk was hateful and executed him publicly.
Oh boy. And yeah, and let's hope Democrat politics doesn't get pulled into that mire.
Well, yeah, that's the trick is because the voices on the street are in a very intense position, absolutist position, on the border, no borders, on policing, abolish the police, and on uh, this kind of new gender movement, which is, protect trans kids, is their mottos. So all three of those mottos are used to push the Democrats from being contradictory in any way to the activists.
Okay, so we'll have one final question from Bob.
This is a bit of a provocative question, perhaps. Why do you think Alex Preddy actually carried, as was his right to carry under the Holy Second Amendment, why do you think he was carrying a gun in his waistband?
There's a very important clip from a week earlier that in Minneapolis, and it's a man standing on a street corner with an AR and with a rifle, and he's being interviewed, and he's surrounded with activists who are blowing their whistles and stuff. Everybody mobilized the week before to push out an ICE patrol. An ICE patrol was rumored to be coming in, or they had all mobilized, and some decided to open carry, not concealed carry, but they decided to open carry the week before. So Preddy's decision to conceal carry might be seen in line with the escalation that was happening on the streets in Minneapolis. People in signal chats were calling for people to carry and not let the government come in. So I think he probably fell into the culture, the moment, and he wasn't the only one that was either backing up their posturing rhetorically or by taking a gun to an action against the federal government.
Homer.
Well, I understood that he had been in a previous incident, Alex Preddy, in which his rib was broken with an ICE agent jumping on him. So maybe that had something to do with his decision to defend himself.
Yeah, correct. And that video is out there. It shows Preddy as a car is driving away. He kicks out the taillight to the ICE agent's SUV, and then he spits on the car. And then the ICE agent gets out. They try to arrest him, and there's this big brawl. And that video is out there. It came out, and then of course people doubted. They thought it was AI. And then two other angles came out. And it was kind of curious that that there was this whole week that elapsed before that video of the first altercation 10 days prior came out. But also, it's because a lot of that video was shot by activists. So they didn't want to put it out there. But I think once a news journalist put out his angle and said, this is video, then others uploaded theirs to show the full picture of his clashing with law enforcement 10 days earlier.
And earlier, you alluded to Renee Good as having inserted herself into the situation. I had understood she was dropping a kid off at school or something.
Right. So this is where the stories get muddied because she was part of a protest action. So there's another video which shows Good with her in her kind of maroon SUV blocking the street, and she's gleefully honking the horn for over 3 minutes. So she put herself in that situation. Her wife then sort of blamed herself and said, I shouldn't have brought her down here. Her wife is the one with the orange refused fascism whistle. And her wife is the one who gets out of the car and is taunting the officer and saying, go home, go get yourself some lunch, big boy, is what she says. And she's taunting the officer. Renee Good's in the car. One officer approaches from one side, tells her to get out. The other officer is recording video and he's walking to the front of the car. And then the wife yells out, go, go, go. And the wife yells out for her to leave. She goes in reverse first, then she hits the accelerator. The wheels actually spin out on the ice. And then the car, lunges forward. But they were all there as part of, she might have dropped off her kid earlier in the day, but they were all there as part of a definitive obstruction action to protest ICE in the neighborhood. And they call themselves legal observers, the protesters, that they're there to observe if everything's happening legally. In the meantime, she was parked perpendicular, obstructing a pretty big street. I was driving that week in Minneapolis, and it's tough, even in an SUV, because the streets were very icy. They were snow and ice, and it was Portland Avenue in Minneapolis is pretty big. It was like a sizable thoroughfare that she was blocking, and so that kind of all added to the tenseness and the confusion of the moment.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy, for taking time to talk to our study group. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Okay. See you all next week.
Well done.
Well done, Bob.
It's just.